The champagne tasted like expensive lies, and I should have known. I'd been swallowing them for months. Standing in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, watching my wife Jennifer laugh at something her sponsor whispered in her ear, I felt that familiar twist in my gut. The charity gala was supposed to be our night together, supporting the Children's Foundation. Instead, I was watching my marriage crumble in real time, surrounded by the city's elite who probably already knew what I was just beginning to understand. My name is Alex Thompson, and I manage investment portfolios for mid-tier clients at Hartwell & Associates. Nothing glamorous, but steady work that paid for our comfortable life. Jennifer, on the other hand, had bigger ambitions. She ran a boutique marketing firm that specialized in high-end charity events, which is how she met Richard Sterling, real estate mogul, foundation board member, and apparently the man who was slowly stealing my wife. "Alex, darling, you look positively miserable," came a voice beside me. I turned to see Patricia Wells, Jennifer's best friend and business associate, holding 2 glasses of wine. She offered me one with that practiced smile she'd perfected over years of networking events. "Just tired," I replied, accepting the glass. "Long week at the office." Patricia's eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite place. "Oh, I'm sure it has been. Jennifer mentioned you've been working late quite often lately." That was interesting, considering Jennifer had been the one coming home after midnight for the past month, claiming client dinners and strategy sessions. I watched her across the room, her hand resting on Sterling's arm as they spoke with the mayor. She wore the red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the anniversary dinner she'd canceled for a last-minute client emergency. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice casual, "how long have you known about Jennifer and Sterling?" Her smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. "Known about what, Alex? They're working together on the Foundation's new campaign. It's perfectly professional." Professional, right. Like the way Sterling's hand lingered on the small of Jennifer's back was professional. Like the way she tilted her head when she laughed at his jokes, the same way she used to laugh at mine. The evening dragged on with painful predictability. During the auction, Sterling bid an obscene amount on a weekend getaway package, then leaned over to whisper something to Jennifer that made her blush. When the dancing started, I watched him lead her onto the floor while I stood by the bar, nursing my 3rd whiskey and trying to look like I wasn't slowly coming apart. That's when Sterling approached me. "Thompson," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of arrogance that came with inherited wealth. "Mind if we chat?" I gestured to the empty space beside me. "It's a free country." He ordered a scotch, top shelf, naturally, and turned to face me. "I wanted to talk to you about Jennifer." The directness caught me off guard. I'd expected more subtle maneuvering, more polite pretense. "What about her?" "She's talented, really talented. The work she's doing for the Foundation is exceptional, and I think she has potential for much bigger things." He paused, swirling his drink. "But I'm concerned that her current situation might be holding her back." "Her situation?" Sterling's smile was cold as winter. "Her marriage, Alex. Let's be honest, you're not exactly moving in the same circles anymore, are you? Jennifer needs someone who can match her ambitions, someone who understands the world she's trying to enter." I felt my jaw clench. "And you think that someone is you?" "I think Jennifer deserves to be with someone who can give her the life she wants. The question is whether you care enough about her to step aside gracefully." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a man openly telling me he intended to steal my wife, framing it as some kind of noble sacrifice I should make for her benefit. I looked across the room where Jennifer was talking animatedly with a group of potential donors, her face glowing with excitement and ambition. "You know what, Sterling?" I said, pulling out my phone and discreetly starting the voice recorder. "Why don't you tell me exactly what kind of life you think you can give her?" He launched into a detailed description of his plans for Jennifer: trips to Europe, connections with major corporations, opportunities to expand her business into markets I could never help her access. As he talked, painting a picture of the glamorous future he envisioned with my wife, I realized this wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated takeover. "The foundation gala next month," he continued. "I'm thinking of announcing Jennifer as the new director of corporate partnerships. It's a six-figure position, plus benefits, plus the kind of networking opportunities that could set her up for life." "And what happens to her husband in this scenario?" Sterling's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "That's really up to you, isn't it? You can make this easy or you can make it difficult. But either way, Jennifer's moving forward. Tonight, she's with me. You're nobody in this equation." He finished his drink and set the glass down with a soft clink. "Think about it, Thompson. Think about what's best for everyone involved." As he walked away, rejoining Jennifer on the dance floor, I stopped the recording and slipped my phone back into my pocket. The conversation had lasted 12 minutes and 37 seconds. 12 minutes and 37 seconds of my marriage being dissected and dismissed by a man who thought money could buy him anything he wanted. Maybe he was right about the money. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated exactly how far a nobody like me was willing to go to prove he was wrong. I finished my whiskey and watched them dance, already planning my next move. The next morning, Jennifer was unusually chatty over breakfast, going on about the success of the gala and the potential new clients she'd met. She mentioned Sterling several times, always in the context of business opportunities and foundation work. Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard his proposition the night before, I might have believed her. "Richard thinks we should expand into corporate retreats," she said, buttering her toast with careful precision. "High-end companies looking for unique team-building experiences with a charitable component." "Richard thinks a lot of things," I replied, not looking up from my laptop where I was reviewing client portfolios. Jennifer paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just an observation." She studied my face for a moment, then shrugged and returned to her breakfast. "I'll be late tonight. Patricia and I are meeting with the Riverside Hotel about their holiday charity drive." Another lie, delivered with the same casual ease as asking me to pass the salt. I made a non-committal sound and continued typing, but my mind was racing. If she was lying about tonight, what else had she been lying about? After Jennifer left for her office, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I went through her things. Not the obvious places like her purse or phone, but the subtle spots where people hide evidence of double lives. The small notebook in her jewelry box contained phone numbers and meeting times that didn't match her official calendar. A credit card statement I found in her car showed charges at restaurants across town on nights she'd claimed to be working late at the office. But the real treasure trove was her laptop. Jennifer had always been careless with passwords, using variations of our anniversary date and our old dog's name. It took me 3 tries to get into her email, and what I found there painted a picture that was somehow worse than I'd imagined. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The affair had been going on for 2 months, but the emails revealed something more complex than simple adultery. Sterling wasn't just seducing my wife. He was systematically recruiting her into his world, dangling opportunities and connections like bait. Jennifer, for her part, wasn't just a passive victim of his charm. She was an active participant, strategizing about how to position herself for maximum advantage. One email chain from the previous week made my hands shake as I read it. From Jennifer, Thompson, IJT Marketing Group. to R. Esterling, sterlingdevelopment.com. Subject, next steps. Richard, last night was incredible. I keep thinking about what you said regarding the foundation position. Alex has been so distant lately, so focused on his little investment accounts. I don't think he even notices how much I've changed, how much I want more than this suburban mediocrity. Patricia thinks I should be more direct about what I want from our marriage, but I'm not sure Alex would understand. He's comfortable with ordinary. I'm not. Can we meet Thursday? Same place? J. From rsterlingdevelopment.com to Jennifer.Thompson IJT Marketing Group. Com. Subject, RE. Next steps. Jennifer, Thursday works perfectly. I've been thinking about our conversation too. You deserve someone who sees your potential, who can help you reach it. Alex seems like a decent enough guy, but he's not the partner you need for the life you want. I have some ideas about how we can move forward. Trust me. R. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The casual dismissal of our marriage, the cold calculation behind every word. It was like reading about strangers, except one of the strangers was supposed to be the woman I'd loved for 15 years. But what really caught my attention was Patricia's involvement. Jennifer's best friend wasn't just a confidant, she was actively encouraging the affair, pushing Jennifer toward a more direct approach. That felt significant, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I copied the relevant emails to a secure folder and cleared the browser history, then spent the next hour researching Sterling's business dealings. What I found was interesting. Sterling Development had several major projects in the works, all requiring significant financing. More importantly, 3 of those projects were being funded through investment packages managed by firms that worked closely with Hartwell and Associates. My boss, David Hartwell, had mentioned Sterling's name in passing during recent meetings about high-value client portfolios. If Sterling was leveraging investments for his development projects, there might be ways to make his life complicated through perfectly legal channels. I was still researching when my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. I called Patricia's office, putting on my most concerned husband voice. Hi, this is Alex Thompson. I was trying to reach Jennifer, but her phone's going straight to voicemail. Is she still in your meeting? There was a pause. Meeting? The Riverside Hotel meeting about their charity drive? Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, that meeting. Yes, it's running very long. You know how these hotel people can be. Patricia was a terrible liar, which was interesting because Jennifer was an excellent one. It suggested their partnership in this deception wasn't entirely equal. Could you have her call me when she gets a chance? Of course, Alex. I'll make sure she gets the message. I hung up and immediately called the Riverside Hotel's events department. No meetings scheduled with JT Marketing Group. No discussions about holiday charity drives. Just another lie in what was becoming an elaborate web of deception. That evening, I waited in the living room with a glass of wine and a printed copy of the email chain. When Jennifer came home at nearly 11, her hair slightly mussed and her lipstick long gone, I was ready. How was your meeting? I asked casually. Exhausting, she replied, not meeting my eyes. Hotel people are so demanding. We barely made any progress. That's strange, I said, taking a sip of wine. I called the Riverside Hotel this afternoon. They said they had no meetings scheduled with your company. Jennifer froze halfway through taking off her coat. What? I was worried when you didn't answer your phone, so I called to check on you. Imagine my surprise when they told me they'd never heard of any charity drive meeting. She turned to face me, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Then her expression shifted to indignation. How dare you check up on me like some kind of detective? I don't have to account for every minute of my day to you, Alex. Actually, I said, standing up and walking to where she stood. In a marriage, we kind of do account to each other. It's called trust. Trust? Jennifer's voice rose. You want to talk about trust? You're spying on me, calling my clients behind my back, treating me like a criminal. Are you? Am I what? A criminal? Or just an adulteress? The word hung in the air between us like a weapon. Jennifer's face went through several expressions before settling on cold fury. I don't know what you think you know, Alex, but you're wrong. Richard Sterling is a client and a professional contact. Nothing more. Richard thinks you should leave me. That stopped her cold. What? I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the gala. Sterling's voice filled the room, laying out his plans for Jennifer's future and dismissing me as nobody in the equation. As the recording played, I watched Jennifer's face transform from defiance to shock to something that looked almost like relief. When it ended, she sat down heavily on the couch. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. I suspected for weeks. I've known for certain since yesterday. Jennifer was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her eyes, not shame or regret, but a kind of resigned determination. I want more than this, Alex. More than investment portfolios and suburban dinner parties and the same conversations every night. Richard can give me that. So you're leaving me for him? I'm leaving you for me. Richard is just a catalyst. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak. That would come later. This was something sharper, more focused. When? After the foundation gala next month. Richard's announcing my new position, and then we'll make it official. How considerate of you to give me a timeline. Jennifer stood up, smoothing down her skirt. I'm going to stay at Patricia's tonight. We can figure out the details tomorrow. As she packed a bag, moving through our bedroom like she was already a stranger, I sat in the living room and planned my next move. Sterling thought he'd won by making me an offer I couldn't refuse. Jennifer thought she could discard our marriage like an old business plan. They were both about to learn that nobody, absolutely nobody, was a more dangerous word than they realized. The next few days passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Jennifer stayed at Patricia's apartment while we maintained the pretense of working out our differences for the benefit of friends and colleagues. She came by twice to collect more clothes, both times treating me with the kind of polite distance she might show a helpful stranger. I used the time to dig deeper into Sterling's business operations and Patricia's role in the whole affair. What I discovered was more interesting than I'd expected. Sterling Development was heavily leveraged, with several projects dependent on continued investment funding. More importantly, the primary investment firm handling Sterling's portfolio was Morrison & Associates, Hartwell's biggest competitor and a company I knew was struggling with liquidity issues. If Sterling's projects hit any snags, he could find himself in serious financial trouble very quickly. Patricia's involvement was more personal. 5 years ago, she'd approached Hartwell & Associates about funding for a marketing venture that would have competed directly with her current partnership with Jennifer. I'd been the one to review her business plan and recommend against the investment. Too risky, insufficient market research, poor financial projections. The venture had collapsed within 6 months, taking Patricia's savings with it. I'd forgotten about the incident entirely, but Patricia clearly hadn't. Her encouragement of Jennifer's affair wasn't just about friendship, it was about revenge. Armed with this information, I began to plan my response. The first step was professional. I scheduled a meeting with David Hartwell to discuss potential investment opportunities in the real estate development sector. David was always interested in expanding our client base, especially into higher-value markets. Sterling Development? David mused, reviewing the materials I'd prepared. I've heard good things about their downtown project. What's your assessment? I'd spent 2 days crafting my response to sound analytical rather than personal. Promising short-term returns, but significant long-term risks. Their financing structure is heavily dependent on continued investment, and their primary backer, Morrison & Associates, is showing signs of instability. If Morrison pulls back, Sterling could find himself overextended very quickly. Interesting. What would you recommend? We could position ourselves as an alternative funding source. Offer Sterling better terms than Morrison, but with more stringent oversight requirements. If he's as successful as he claims, he should welcome the opportunity to diversify his backing. David smiled. I like it. Set up a meeting. The second step was more personal. I called Jennifer's office and spoke with her assistant, a young woman named Michelle, who'd always been friendly during company events. Hi, Michelle. This is Alex Thompson. I'm trying to plan a surprise for Jennifer's birthday next month, but I need to work around her schedule. Could you help me figure out when she's free? Michelle was happy to help, and within 10 minutes, I had a complete copy of Jennifer's calendar for the next month, including several private appointments that didn't appear on her official schedule. The pattern was clear: every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, blocked out as client meetings, but with no client names attached. The third step required patience. I began documenting everything: Jennifer's comings and goings, Sterling's public appearances, Patricia's involvement in covering for them. I installed a small camera in our driveway to record who came and went from the house. I saved every text message, every email, every piece of evidence that might be useful later. But I also did something else. I started building my own network. My friend Mike Rodriguez owned a gym downtown, the kind of place where people talked freely and information flowed like water. Mike had grown up in the city, knew everyone, and had a particular talent for learning things about people that they'd rather keep private. You look terrible, Mike said when I stopped by his gym on Friday afternoon. Jennifer finally figure out you're too good for her? Something like that. Mike, what do you know about Richard Sterling? Mike's expression grew serious. Real estate guy? Lot of money, lot of connections, lot of enemies. Why? I gave him the abbreviated version of recent events, watching his face grow darker as I talked. Son of a gun, Mike muttered when I finished. So he's trying to buy your wife and your life? That's about the size of it. Mike was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. What do you need? Information. Sterling's got to have vulnerabilities, business problems, personal issues, something that makes him less untouchable than he thinks he is. Give me a week. I know people who know people. The following Tuesday, I put my plan into motion. Instead of going to work, I followed Jennifer to her client meeting. She drove across town to an upscale apartment complex and parked outside a building I recognized as one of Sterling's properties. 20 minutes later, Sterling's silver Mercedes pulled up beside her car. I watched from across the street as they embraced in the parking lot, no longer bothering to hide their relationship. They disappeared into the building together, and I settled in to wait. 3 hours later, they emerged looking relaxed and intimate. Sterling walked Jennifer to her car, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away before getting into his own vehicle. I followed Sterling. He drove to his office building downtown, parked in his reserved space, and walked toward the entrance. I parked across the street and approached on foot, timing my arrival to coincide with his. Sterling? I called out as he reached the door. He turned, and his expression shifted from surprise to annoyance when he recognized me. Thompson, what are you doing here? I wanted to talk to you about your conversation with David Hartwell. Sterling's face went blank. I haven't spoken to David Hartwell. Not yet, but you will. You see, Hartwell and Associates is very interested in expanding into real estate development investment. I've recommended your projects as potential opportunities. I don't understand. I smiled, and I could tell from Sterling's expression that it wasn't a pleasant smile. You told me Jennifer deserves someone who can give her the life she wants. I've been thinking about that, and I realized you're right. She does deserve security, stability, long-term financial prospects. The question is whether you can actually provide those things. Sterling's jaw tightened. I think I can manage my own finances, Thompson. Can you? Because from where I sit, Sterling Development looks like a house of cards. One strong wind, and the whole thing comes tumbling down. You don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and handed it to him. Morrison & Associates is cutting back their real estate investments by 40% next quarter. Your downtown project is over budget and behind schedule. Your financing for the waterfront development is contingent on pre-sales that aren't materializing. Should I continue? Sterling opened the folder, and I watched his face as he scanned the documents inside. All public records, all perfectly legal to obtain, all painting a picture of a man whose empire was more fragile than it appeared. Where did you get this? I'm an investment manager, Sterling. This is what I do. I analyze risk, and you're looking very risky right now. He closed the folder and handed it back to me. What do you want? I want you to understand that the nobody you dismiss so easily has the power to make your life very complicated. I can offer you alternative financing that could solve your problems, or I can recommend that every investment firm in the city stay away from Sterling Development. Your choice. Sterling stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him recalculating, trying to figure out how the harmless husband had suddenly become a threat. You're bluffing. Am I? Call David Hartwell. Ask him about our conversation regarding high-risk real estate investments and the importance of thorough due diligence. I turned and walked away, leaving Sterling standing in front of his building with the folder in his hand and a very different expression on his face than the one he'd worn at the gala. That evening, Jennifer came home for the first time in a week. She found me in the kitchen, cooking dinner as if nothing had changed. We need to talk, she said. About what? Richard called me today. He said you approached him with some kind of business proposition. I continued stirring the pasta sauce. I'm always looking for new investment opportunities. Your boyfriend has some interesting projects. He's not my... Jennifer stopped herself. Alex, what are you doing? I turned to face her, and for the first time since the gala, I felt like I was the one in control of the conversation. I'm doing exactly what you suggested, Jennifer. I'm thinking about what's best for everyone involved. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though I doubt Jennifer recognized it as such. To her, I was simply being unexpectedly accommodating about our impending separation, even helpful in planning the logistics of dividing our assets and responsibilities. What she didn't realize was that every conversation, every document, every seemingly casual question was part of a larger strategy. I've been thinking about the house, I said one evening as we sat in the living room, maintaining the pretense of civilized discussion. Since you'll be moving in with Sterling eventually, it makes sense for me to buy out your half of the equity. Jennifer looked surprised. You want to keep the house? It's practical. I know the neighborhood, the commute works for my job, and honestly, starting over somewhere new feels overwhelming right now. She nodded, looking almost relieved. That would actually be easier for me too. Richard's place is beautiful, and he's talking about buying something even bigger once the foundation position is official. About that, I said carefully. Have you thought about what happens if the foundation board doesn't approve the appointment? It's not exactly a done deal. Jennifer's confidence wavered slightly. Richard says it's just a formality. He has significant influence with the board. I'm sure he does, but boards can be unpredictable, especially when it comes to hiring decisions that might look like favoritism. I could see the seed of doubt taking root, exactly as I'd intended. Jennifer had built her entire future around Sterling's promises, but she was smart enough to recognize that promises weren't guarantees. Meanwhile, Mike had been busy gathering information about Sterling's vulnerabilities. What he'd discovered was better than I'd hoped. Your boy Richard has expensive tastes, Mike told me over coffee at his gym. Expensive car, expensive apartment, expensive habits. But here's the interesting part. Most of it's financed. The Mercedes is leased, the apartment is rented, and he's been borrowing against future project profits to maintain his lifestyle. How do you know all this? Mike grinned. His personal trainer is a friend of mine. Apparently Sterling likes to talk when he's working out, and he's been stressed lately about cash flow issues. Also, he's not as discreet about his affairs as he thinks he is. Your wife isn't the first married woman he's pursued with promises of a better life. That last piece of information was particularly interesting. If Sterling had a pattern of seducing married women with promises of professional advancement, it suggested his interest in Jennifer might be less romantic than strategic. I shared this information with Jennifer in the most subtle way possible. "I ran into Carol Martinez at the grocery store yesterday," I mentioned casually. Carol was a local event planner whose marriage had ended in a messy divorce the previous year. "How is she doing?" "Better," she says. She mentioned something interesting about her divorce. Apparently her ex-husband wasn't the only problem. She said she'd gotten involved with someone who made a lot of promises about advancing her career, but it all fell through when she left her marriage. Jennifer looked up from her magazine. "What kind of promises?" "Oh, connections with major clients, opportunities to expand her business, that sort of thing." She didn't mention names, but she said the whole experience taught her to be more careful about mixing business with personal relationships. I could see Jennifer processing this, trying to determine if there was a hidden message in my casual conversation. There was, of course, but I was counting on her own paranoia to make it more powerful than any direct accusation. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Patricia herself. I'd been thinking about Patricia's role in the affair, trying to understand why Jennifer's best friend would encourage the destruction of her marriage. The business venture I'd rejected years earlier was part of it, but something about her behavior suggested deeper motivations. So I did something I'd never done before. I investigated Patricia Wells. What I found was fascinating. Patricia's marketing firm was struggling financially, despite her partnership with Jennifer. She'd been borrowing money to cover operating expenses and had recently taken out a second mortgage on her condo. More interesting was her relationship history. 3 serious relationships in the past 5 years, all with married men, all ending when the men chose to stay with their wives. Patricia wasn't just encouraging Jennifer's affair out of friendship or revenge. She was living vicariously through it, projecting her own fantasies of stolen happiness onto Jennifer's situation. Armed with this insight, I made a calculated decision. I called Patricia and asked to meet her for coffee. "Alex," she said when we sat down at a small cafe downtown, "I hope you're not going to ask me to talk Jennifer out of leaving you. She's made her decision. Actually, I wanted to thank you." Patricia blinked. "Thank me?" "For being such a good friend to Jennifer during this difficult time. I know she's been staying at your place, and I appreciate you giving her the space she needs to figure things out." "Oh, well, that's what friends do." "It is, and I wanted you to know that I don't blame you for encouraging her to pursue her happiness. You've always been a good judge of character and situations." Patricia looked puzzled but pleased. "I just want what's best for Jennifer." "Of course you do. That's why I wanted to ask your advice about something. I've been doing some research on Richard Sterling. Just due diligence, you understand, since Jennifer's future is tied to his, and I've found some concerning information about his business practices." I pulled out a folder containing the same documents I'd shown Sterling, plus additional information Mike had gathered about his personal finances and relationship history. I'm not sure whether to share this with Jennifer or not. On one hand, she deserves to know what she's getting into. On the other hand, maybe I'm just being vindictive. Patricia opened the folder and began reading. I watched her face as she absorbed the information. Sterling's financial instability, his pattern of relationships with married women, the questionable promises he'd made to previous partners. "Where did you get all this?" she asked quietly. "Public records, mostly. Some from professional contacts. It's all legitimate information, nothing illegal or unethical about obtaining it." Patricia continued reading, and I could see her mind working. She was smart enough to recognize the implications of what she was seeing, and experienced enough with failed relationships to understand the warning signs. "What are you going to do with this?" she asked finally. "I don't know. That's why I wanted your advice. You know Jennifer better than anyone. Do you think she'd want to know?" It was a masterful bit of manipulation, if I do say so myself. I was asking Patricia to choose between her loyalty to Jennifer's current happiness and her concern for Jennifer's long-term welfare. More importantly, I was forcing her to confront the possibility that the fairy tale ending she'd been encouraging might actually be a disaster in disguise. Patricia closed the folder and looked at me with new respect. "You're not the same man Jennifer married, are you?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm not. The question is whether that's a good thing or a bad thing." "I think," Patricia said slowly, "that Jennifer needs to see this information. But not from you. It would be too easy for her to dismiss it as jealousy or manipulation." "Would you show it to her?" Patricia nodded. "Yes. But Alex, what happens after that is up to her. This information might change her mind, or it might just make her more determined to prove everyone wrong." "I understand. I just want her to make an informed decision." As I walked back to my car, I felt a grim satisfaction. I'd planted seeds of doubt with Jennifer about the foundation position, introduced questions about Sterling's reliability, and now I'd given Patricia the ammunition to deliver a devastating blow to Jennifer's confidence in her chosen future. But I wasn't done yet. The foundation gala was still 2 weeks away, and I had one more card to play, one that would ensure Sterling's promises to Jennifer would be impossible to keep, regardless of what she decided about our marriage. It was time to make my move in the business world, where I had more power than either Sterling or Jennifer realized. David Hartwell was intrigued by my proposal to position our firm as an alternative funding source for Sterling development, but he wanted more details before committing to a formal approach. "You've done impressive research on Sterling's portfolio," he said, reviewing the comprehensive analysis I'd prepared. "But I need to understand your motivation here, Alex. This seems like a significant departure from your usual investment recommendations." I'd prepared for this question. Sterling Development represents exactly the kind of high-value client we've been trying to attract. Real estate development is a growth sector, and if we can establish a relationship with a successful firm like Sterling's, it opens doors to similar opportunities. "And the risks you've identified are manageable with proper oversight and structured agreements. Sterling's problems stem from over-reliance on a single funding source and insufficient liquidity buffers. We can solve both issues while protecting our investment." David nodded slowly. "Set up a meeting. But Alex, if this goes badly, it reflects on both of us." "Understood." I called Sterling's office that afternoon and spoke with his assistant, a polished woman who clearly screened his calls carefully. "Mr. Sterling is very busy this week," she said when I explained the purpose of my call. "Could you send some preliminary information for his review?" "Of course, but please emphasize that this is a time-sensitive opportunity. We have other development firms interested in similar arrangements." That wasn't entirely true, but it had the desired effect. Sterling called me back within 2 hours. "Thompson," he said without preamble, "what exactly are you proposing?" "A meeting with David Hartwell to discuss alternative financing for your current projects. We're prepared to offer more favorable terms than your current arrangement with Morrison and Associates." There was a long pause. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just good business. Your projects show strong potential, and we're looking to expand into real estate development investment. It's mutually beneficial." "And this has nothing to do with Jennifer?" I let a note of professional irritation creep into my voice. "Mr. Sterling, I'm an investment manager, not a jealous husband. My personal life and my professional responsibilities are completely separate." Another pause. "When can we meet?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if you're available. 2 o'clock at Hartwell and Associates. I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. Sterling was walking directly into the trap I'd been building for weeks. That evening, Patricia called Jennifer and asked her to come over for dinner. I knew this because Jennifer mentioned it to me, adding that Patricia had sounded unusually serious. "Is everything all right with her?" I asked, maintaining my facade of concerned friendship. "I think so. She's been stressed about work lately. You know how it is." I did indeed know how it was. While Jennifer was at Patricia's apartment, presumably learning some uncomfortable truths about her boyfriend's business practices and relationship history, I was at home preparing for the next day's meeting. I'd crafted a proposal that was simultaneously generous and restrictive, offering Sterling the funding he needed while imposing oversight requirements that would give Hartwell and Associates significant control over his business operations. More importantly, the proposal included clauses that would allow us to withdraw funding if Sterling's personal conduct created negative publicity or legal complications for his business ventures. It was a standard provision in high-value investment contracts, but in Sterling's case, it would prove particularly relevant. Jennifer came home late that night, looking troubled and distracted. She went straight to bed without our usual stilted conversation, and I could hear her on the phone with someone, presumably Sterling, for nearly an hour. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. The meeting with Sterling went exactly as I'd hoped. David was impressed by Sterling's presentation of his development projects, and Sterling was clearly interested in our funding proposal. But when we got to the contract details, Sterling's enthusiasm began to wane. "These oversight requirements seem excessive," he said, reviewing the terms I'd drafted. "They're standard for investments of this magnitude," David replied smoothly. "We have a fiduciary responsibility to our clients to ensure their investments are protected." "And this clause about personal conduct?" I leaned forward. "Also standard. If a business principal becomes involved in legal troubles or public scandals, it can affect the viability of their projects. We need the option to protect our investment." Sterling's jaw tightened. "What exactly constitutes a public scandal?" "Oh, the usual things," I said casually. "Criminal charges, bankruptcy proceedings, highly publicized personal disputes that reflect negatively on the business. Nothing you'd need to worry about." Sterling set down the contract. "I need to review this with my attorney before making any decisions." "Of course," David said. "But I should mention that we have other opportunities under consideration. If you're interested, we'd need a decision by early next week." After Sterling left, David turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Interesting man," he said. "Confident, ambitious, but there's something underneath that makes me nervous." "What do you mean?" He seemed more concerned about the personal conduct clause than the financial terms. In my experience, that's usually a red flag. I nodded seriously. "Should we reconsider the proposal?" "No, let's proceed. But let's also do some additional background research. I want to know more about Mr. Sterling's personal life before we commit to a business relationship." "Perfect." That evening, Jennifer finally confronted me about the information Patricia had shared with her. "Patricia showed me some documents about Richard," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Financial records, background information. She said you gave them to her." "I asked for her advice about whether you should see them," I replied. "I thought you deserved to know what you were getting into, but I wasn't sure if hearing it from me would just seem like jealousy." "Is it? Jealousy?" I considered the question seriously. "Partly, yes, but mostly it's concern. Jennifer, you're planning to leave our marriage and build a new life with this man. Don't you want to know who he really is?" Jennifer sat down across from me, and for the first time in weeks, she looked uncertain. "The financial problems, are they as serious as these documents suggest?" "Serious enough that he's actively looking for new funding sources. That's actually how I learned most of this information. He's been approaching investment firms all over the city." "And the other women?" I met her eyes directly. "3 that I know of in the past 5 years. All married, all promised career advancement and financial security, all eventually discarded when the relationships became inconvenient." Jennifer was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. "The foundation position," she said finally. "Do you think it's real?" "I think Richard Sterling makes promises he believes he can keep at the time he makes them. Whether he can actually keep them is a different question." "What should I do, Alex?" It was the first time in months that she'd asked for my opinion about anything important, and I realized this was the moment that would determine everything that came next. "I think," I said carefully, "that you should make your decision based on what you want from your life, not what anyone else promises to give you, whether that's Sterling or me or anyone else." Jennifer nodded slowly, and I could see her trying to reconcile the fairy tale future she'd been imagining with the harsh realities Patricia had shown her. "I need some time to think." "Of course you do." As she went upstairs to our bedroom, the first time she'd slept at home in over a week, I allowed myself a moment of cautious optimism. The seeds of doubt I'd been planting were finally taking root, and Sterling's house of cards was beginning to wobble. But I wasn't finished yet. The foundation gala was still a week away, and I had one final move to make, one that would ensure Sterling's promises to Jennifer would crumble completely, regardless of what she decided about our marriage. It was time to make Richard Sterling's personal conduct very, very public. The week leading up to the foundation gala was a study in controlled chaos. Jennifer had moved back home but maintained an emotional distance that felt like living with a polite stranger. Sterling had been calling her constantly, presumably trying to reassure her about the concerns Patricia had raised, while also dealing with the pressure of our funding proposal. I knew from David that Sterling was seriously considering our offer. His attorney had requested several clarifications about the contract terms, and Sterling himself had called twice to discuss the timeline for funding approval. What Sterling didn't know was that I'd already arranged for the proposal to be rejected. It was surprisingly easy to sabotage my own deal. A few carefully placed concerns about Sterling's financial stability, some questions about the wisdom of entering the real estate development market during uncertain economic times, and a suggestion that we might be better served by focusing on our existing client base. David was naturally cautious about high-risk investments, and it didn't take much to tip him toward rejection. "I've been thinking about the Sterling proposal," David said during our Friday morning meeting. "The more I review his financials, the more concerned I become about his long-term viability." "I've had similar concerns," I replied. "The projects look promising, but the underlying financial structure is shaky. Let's pass on this one. Send Sterling a polite rejection, something about portfolio diversification and risk management. I'll take care of it." I called Sterling that afternoon with the news, delivering it with just the right mix of professional regret and personal satisfaction. "I'm sorry, Richard, but after extensive review, Hartwell and Associates has decided not to move forward with funding your projects at this time." There was a long silence. "Can you tell me why?" "The usual concerns: market volatility, risk assessment, portfolio balance. Nothing personal, just business." "Nothing personal," Sterling repeated, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "Right. This wouldn't have anything to do with your wife, would it?" "My wife is leaving me for you, Sterling. If this were personal revenge, don't you think I'd be trying to help you succeed so you could afford to take her off my hands?" It was a masterful piece of misdirection, and I could hear Sterling trying to work through the logic. From his perspective, a jealous husband would want to sabotage the affair, but a practical husband might actually want to enable it. The confusion bought me exactly the credibility I needed. "Look," I said, adopting a more conciliatory tone, "there are other funding sources. Morrison and Associates might be cutting back, but there are plenty of investment firms in the city. You'll find something." "Yeah," Sterling said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Thanks for the consideration." After hanging up, I sat back and contemplated the beautiful symmetry of what I'd accomplished. Sterling was now facing a funding crisis that threatened his ability to complete his current projects, let alone expand into new ventures. The foundation position he'd promised Jennifer was dependent on his continued success and influence, both of which were now in serious jeopardy. But I still had one more card to play. That evening, I made a call to Tom Morrison at Morrison and Associates. Tom and I had worked together early in our careers, and we'd maintained a friendly professional relationship over the years. "Alex," Tom said when he took my call, "good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We've been approached by Richard Sterling about alternative funding for his development projects. I thought you should know he's shopping around." There was a pause. "Sterling's looking for alternative funding?" "Apparently he's concerned about Morrison's plans to reduce real estate investments. He seemed to think you might be pulling back from his projects." "Where did he get that idea?" "I have no clue, Tom. I just thought you'd want to know that one of your major clients is actively seeking replacement funding." Tom was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him thinking. Sterling hadn't told Morrison and Associates that he was exploring other options, which meant he was either planning to jump ship without warning, or he was trying to negotiate from a position of strength by creating the appearance of alternatives. Either way, it would make Morrison very nervous about their relationship with Sterling Development. "Thanks for the heads up, Alex. I appreciate the courtesy." "No problem. How's business otherwise?" "Busy. Actually, we're not cutting back on real estate investments at all. I'm not sure where Sterling got that impression." "Perfect." The foundation gala was held on a Saturday evening at the same hotel where this whole mess had started. Jennifer spent the afternoon getting ready, and I could see the tension in her shoulders as she applied her makeup and selected her jewelry. "Are you nervous?" I asked, adjusting my tie in the mirror. "A little. Tonight's important for my career. Whatever happens, I hope it works out the way you want it to." Jennifer met my eyes in the mirror. "Thank you. I know this hasn't been easy for you." "No," I said quietly. "It hasn't. But I want you to be happy, Jennifer, even if that means being happy without me." It was possibly the most honest thing I'd said to her in months, and I could see it affected her. The gala was everything the previous event had been: elegant, expensive, and full of people who thought their money made them important. But this time, I wasn't the ignored husband standing by the bar. This time, I was a player in the game. Sterling was working the room with his usual confidence, but I could see the strain around his eyes. Jennifer stayed close to him, playing the role of the devoted partner, but she kept glancing around nervously. Patricia was there, too, watching the proceedings with the intensity of someone who had a personal stake in the outcome. When she caught my eye across the room, she nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of our shared understanding about what was really happening. The announcement came during the dinner portion of the evening. The Foundation's board chairman stood up to introduce the new director of corporate partnerships, building up the suspense with a speech about finding the right person for an important position. "It gives me great pleasure to announce that our new director of corporate partnerships will be—" I watched Sterling's face, saw the confident smile, saw Jennifer lean forward in anticipation. "Margaret Hoffman, formerly of the United Way." The silence at Sterling's table was deafening. Jennifer's face went white, and Sterling looked like he'd been punched. Around them, people applauded politely, unaware of the personal drama playing out at table 12. I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for Jennifer. Whatever her faults, whatever mistakes she'd made, she'd genuinely believed in the future Sterling had promised her. Watching that future evaporate in real time was painful, even for me. But Sterling's reaction was what I'd been waiting for. The mask of controlled confidence slipped completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his wine glass, and stormed toward the exit. Jennifer followed him, and after a moment's hesitation, so did I. I caught up with them in the hotel parking lot where Sterling was pacing beside his Mercedes while Jennifer stood nearby, looking lost and confused. "Richard," she was saying, "what happened? You said the position was guaranteed." "It was supposed to be," Sterling snapped. "Something changed. Someone got to the board." "Who?" Sterling's eyes found mine across the parking lot, and I saw understanding dawn on his face. "Him," he said, pointing at me. "Your husband. He's been sabotaging me for weeks." Jennifer turned to look at me, her expression confused. Alex? What is he talking about? I walked over to where they stood, maintaining the same calm demeanor I'd cultivated throughout this entire ordeal. I have no idea, I said reasonably. Richard, I think you're letting stress get the better of you. Stress? Sterling's voice rose. You've been systematically destroying my business relationships, spreading rumors about my finances, turning people against me. That's a serious accusation, I said. Do you have any proof? Sterling opened his mouth, then closed it, because of course he had no proof. Everything I'd done had been perfectly legal, perfectly legitimate, perfectly deniable. Richard, Jennifer said quietly, maybe we should go home and talk about this calmly. Home? Sterling laughed bitterly. What home? Jennifer, I can't afford the apartment anymore. Morrison and Associates is threatening to pull funding from all my projects. The foundation position was supposed to solve everything, and now… He trailed off, but the damage was done. Jennifer was staring at him with a mixture of horror and understanding. You needed my foundation salary to pay your bills? Sterling's silence was answer enough. Jennifer turned to me, and I could see her putting the pieces together. Sterling's financial problems, the failed funding proposal, the foundation position that had never been as secure as he'd claimed. How long have you known? She asked. Known what? About Richard's situation, about the foundation position, about all of it. I considered lying, but decided the truth would be more devastating. I've suspected for weeks that Sterling was in financial trouble. The foundation position was never guaranteed. I called 3 board members to verify, and they all said the decision was still under review. As for his promises to you… I pulled out my phone and played a recording I'd made of my conversation with Carol Martinez, the event planner whose marriage had been destroyed by a similar relationship with Sterling. Jennifer listened in silence as Carol described Sterling's pattern of seducing married women with promises of career advancement, then abandoning them when the relationships became inconvenient or expensive. When the recording ended, Jennifer looked at Sterling with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and completely disillusioned. Is it true? She asked. Sterling looked between us, trapped and desperate. Jennifer, you have to understand. Is it true? Yes, he said quietly, but this time was different. This time I meant it. Jennifer nodded slowly, then turned and walked toward her car. Jennifer, wait, Sterling called after her. We can figure this out. We can make this work. She stopped and looked back at him. No, Richard, we can't. Because you're right about one thing. My husband has been playing a game, and he's better at it than either of us realized. She got in her car and drove away, leaving Sterling and me alone in the parking lot. Sterling turned to face me, and for a moment, I thought he might try to hit me. Instead, he just shook his head. You won, he said. Congratulations. I didn't win anything, I replied. I just made sure you lost. Sterling got in his Mercedes and drove away, and I stood alone in the parking lot, surrounded by the debris of 3 lives I'd systematically destroyed. The strange thing was, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, like a chess player who'd won a game by sacrificing every piece on the board, including his own queen. I drove home to an empty house and sat in my living room, waiting to see if Jennifer would come back, or if this was how my marriage would end. Not with arguments or tears, but with the quiet recognition that we'd all played a game where nobody really won. Jennifer came home 3 hours later. She found me in the kitchen, making coffee and trying to process what I'd accomplished and what it had cost me. That was quite a performance tonight, she said, sitting down across from me at the table, where we'd shared 15 years of breakfasts and dinners and ordinary conversations. Which part? All of it. The concerned husband routine, the innocent bystander act, the way you systematically destroyed Richard's life while pretending to be the victim. I poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across to her. Did I destroy his life, or did I just expose what was already there? Jennifer considered this. Both, I think. Richard was always living beyond his means, always making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But you accelerated his downfall deliberately. Yes, I did. Why? It was a fair question, and I'd been asking myself the same thing for weeks. Because he dismissed me, I said finally. Because he looked at our marriage, our life together, everything we'd built, and decided it was worthless. Because he thought money and connections made him better than me. And because I agreed with him. I met her eyes. And because you agreed with him. We sat in silence for a while, drinking our coffee and contemplating the ruins of our marriage and Sterling's career. What happens now? Jennifer asked. I don't know. What do you want to happen? Jennifer was quiet for a long time, and I could see her working through the events of the past few months, her affair, Sterling's promises, my revenge, the foundation gala, and the cold realization that she'd been as much a pawn in Sterling's game as I'd been in hers. I want to understand something, she said finally. When you recorded Richard at the first gala, when you started investigating his finances, when you planted those doubts with Patricia, was any of that about saving our marriage, or was it all just about winning? It was the most important question she could have asked, and I owed her an honest answer. At first, I thought it was about saving our marriage, but somewhere along the way, it became about proving that I wasn't the nobody Richard thought I was, that I had power too, and intelligence, and the ability to fight back. And our marriage? I looked at the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the woman who'd been willing to throw away our life together for promises of something better, and I realized that the man who'd started this campaign of revenge might have been fighting for their marriage, but the man who'd finished it had been fighting for something else entirely. I don't know if our marriage can survive what we've done to each other, I said, but I know it can't survive what I've become. Jennifer nodded, and I could see that she understood. The quiet, steady man she'd married was gone, replaced by someone calculating and ruthless enough to destroy another person's life with surgical precision. Sterling had been right about one thing. I wasn't the same person anymore. So, what happens now? She asked again. Now we figure out who we are after all this, and whether those people can find a way to be happy, together or apart. Jennifer reached across the table and took my hand, and for a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be married to someone who knew me better than anyone else in the world. I'm sorry, Alex, for all of it. So am I. We sat there holding hands across the kitchen table, two people who'd loved each other once and might love each other again if we could figure out how to forgive ourselves for the people we'd become. Outside, it started to rain, and I thought about Sterling driving through the city in his expensive car, probably wondering how his carefully constructed life had collapsed so completely. I thought about Patricia, who'd helped destroy her best friend's marriage out of old resentments and vicarious dreams. I thought about the foundation board, who'd made their decision based on merit and qualifications, unaware that they'd been the final piece in an elaborate revenge plot. And I thought about the price of proving that nobody was more dangerous than anyone realized. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for another day, another chance, another game where the stakes were always higher than anyone expected. But that's a story for another time.